Alternative Experience.
The Alternative Experience.
The Alternative Experience.
Hey guys, Nicky Joe. Welcome to Alternative Experience. So this week's episode, I had a near-death experience, and it was 17 years ago, but today it's one of my fondest memories, and I want to explain to you why. So today, at time of recording, the 22nd of February 2024, marks the 17th anniversary of an experience that I had, which I kind of credit as an enormous kind of pivot point in my life. Now, on that fateful day, 17 long years ago, I was lucky enough to have a life-changing experience. Now, it was an experience that at the time didn't really feel like the blessing that it actually became, but today, with, I suppose, the benefit of hindsight and a hell of a lot of personal growth, I now look upon it as, I think it's really the day that sparked my journey to where I am in my life right now. Now, I know that's a bit of a word salad, and I recognise that this is actually true for each of us. Now, kind of woven into the fabric of our everyday lives, every single day obviously contributes to shaping who we are at this very moment, making our journeys very unique. And uniquely ours. But every now and then we get to experience something a little bit different. We have those standout experiences, and this is, I would say, one of my top 2 standout days during my 44 years on planet Earth. I suppose you could call it maybe the first real significant chapter in my story. So when you're on podcasts and you appear on shows, you always have to have your story. And obviously it's just little events that stand out that were part of your journey that got you to that particular conversation. And this one is definitely one of my top 2. So what was it that happened? What experience could have been so unbelievably positive, so life-changing, that I'm still drawing from it 17 long years later? Well, you're going to be surprised. It's not what you might think. So anybody that hasn't seen the article, there's still going to be a bit of suspense here. Anybody that's seen the article knows already. But basically, the 22nd of February 2007 started as just a normal day. I had very, very little in the diary. I think my car was in for a service and I had a normal day in the office. Now, at the time, I was living in Portsmouth, and my best friend, Peter Collins, always did the work on my car. He was the only person I trusted. So before I started work, I sort of made my way 20-minute journey along the A27 to Hayling Island, where he lived, dropped the car off to him, and then went and did my day's work. So after dinner, I sort of made my way down to Peter's lockup to collect my car. Everything was fine. However, Peter had noticed that there was kind of a bulge on the inside of my rear tyre, almost as if maybe I clipped a curb or something. And he told me to get it sorted as a matter of urgency. He said it was still safe to drive, but I had to promise to take extra special care on that 8-mile journey home, and also get it booked in the following morning to get the tyre sorted, which I promised to do. Now, on the journey home, I did exactly what he told me to. I kept Blue Steel, as she was affectionately known, firmly in the slow lane between 60 and 70 miles an hour, and I made my way safely back to Portsmouth. Now, as with pretty much any UK city, as you enter Portsmouth, you come to a number of roundabouts. Now, the first I entered and exited without any issues. Unfortunately, as I began to approach the second, I could see a vehicle in my rearview mirror coming up really, really quickly. And I was kind of doing the calculations, and I could see they were going to undertake me. Now, unfortunately, they decided to do this on the roundabout and also cut me off on the exit. They didn't actually take the roundabout, so I was forced to brake heavily while already being in a sort of mid-turn. And as I exited the roundabout, it became pretty clear to me that the back end of my car, I'd lost control. It was already going a little bit. So I fought to regain control. And everything kind of went into slow motion at this point. Now, I somehow managed to avoid hitting the other vehicle, and more importantly, the central reservation, which was solid concrete and metal railings. So I didn't really want to hit that. But that only made things a little bit worse for me, because my vehicle then slid completely out of control the other way, left the road only to collide driver's door on with a highway signage post, the really big signposts that don't move. Now, unfortunately, as my car folded around the post, it collided directly with me, firstly on the right side of my hip, which ironically smashed my pelvis into 3 places on the left-hand side. And as the post continued to tear through the car, it then struck me on the right side of my rib cage, and it broke all but 2 of them in the process. Now, although I'm not very proud of the next admission, and I don't want people to take it as advice, I do need to mention it because the ambulance and fire brigade mentioned that it probably did save my life. Now, I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and as a result of the force, I was kind of pushed into the passenger side of the vehicle. And the reason this potentially saved my life is if I was strapped into the seat, then the post would have come through. It would have no doubt struck me on the head, and perhaps this story would never have been written. So as soon as I kind of recovered like even like the slightest of my composure, I tried to get out of the car as quickly as I could. I've watched far too many movies, and I had these delusional thoughts of the car actually exploding. So they generally went through my mind, and I wanted to get out. And because of the damage to the car, I had to make this escape through the passenger side. Now, due to the impact with my ribs, I was completely winded. My lungs were empty. There was nothing in there at all, and I couldn't breathe. And to kind of make things worse is the airbag hit me in the face, and it caused me to bite right down into my tongue. Now, due to the adrenaline, I didn't know this, but I had blood pouring out my mouth and I couldn't breathe. So I had thoughts going through my head of puncturing my lungs. I mean, in fairness, as I made my way out of the car, even though I'm not a religious person, I do remember saying kind of a little prayer to my mum, just apologising to her. I thought she was going to have to bury another child. But once I was out of the car, I was, again, still completely unaware of my sort of injuries, in total shock. So I attempted to stand up and walk to the side of the road to try and flag a car down, but my legs just would not work. I'd sort of get up, attempt to walk, and they would kind of fold over each other, and I just kept falling down. So in the end, I ended up having to drag myself on my belly, sort of commando style, around 10 to 15 meters to the side of the road. And as I say, at this stage, adrenaline's still going. I had no real pain anywhere. I just could not breathe, could not get any air into my lungs. And I was like, what the bloody hell have I done to my legs? Have I broken my back? What is going on? I really did have so many worries flying through my mind at the time. Now, I attempted to flag passing traffic from the ground for what seemed like a couple of minutes, but I'm sure it wasn't that long. Eventually, a truck driver saw me and he pulled over, came to my aid, and he called me an ambulance and called my brother for me as well. Now, my experience wasn't quite over here at this point. An ambulance did arrive, but the police wouldn't let them leave until they had a chance to check the CCTV footage. They basically said if it was dangerous driving, they wanted to read me my rights at the scene. Now, once they were happy that it wasn't dangerous driving, it was just an accident, and they actually became a little bit more interested in the other driver. I don't know what came of that. It never sort of cropped back up again. We were cleared to make our way down to QA Hospital. And I had a little bit more bad fortune as well. It wasn't quite over. It was a bad day. So I think they wanted to get all the bad luck out in one go. But I arrived in the hospital just as the ambulance shifts were changing. And I laid there in arrivals. Unknowingly, I had a shirt full of broken glass from my windows, which I didn't really realise until the feeling started coming back into my body. But for nearly 3.5 hours. And eventually my brother asked for probably the 10th time when I was going to be seen. And the moment he mentioned the words RTA, they realised I hadn't been checked in, and red lights went, and they sort of rushed me off to an emergency ward. Now, again, even at this point, while it was quite an insane experience, I thought I was really lucky. I still wasn't experiencing too much in the way of pain. My ribs were hurting a bit. But truth be told, I thought it was all a little bit over dramatic, and I was more worried about my car, and I was still convinced I'd be home the next day. So I had a number of scans, x-rays, examinations, and at this point, no one was really telling me anything. It was quite strange. Now, eventually around about 7 a.m. the next morning, a nurse entered into my room with a rope and some weights. At this point, I was just really confused. So I just said, look, am I going home today? And she just told me the doctor would go through it all when he did his rounds. Now, when the doctor finally came, he informed me that I was very lucky to be alive, which is quite obvious, but that I'd broken my pelvis, and as such, I wouldn't be going home for up to 3 months. Now, what the actual fuck? He also explained that due to the way that it had broken, it wasn't really a certainty that I was going to make a full recovery. I may not walk the same again. Now, obviously, at this point, I really couldn't take it all in. What the hell was he saying? It's like, number one, I didn't really understand the pelvis at this point in finite detail. And also, if it was that serious, why wasn't the pain reflecting this? So I asked him to really sort of explain my injury again. And he told me to imagine a healthy pelvis being like an open book. And then he told me to imagine that book being slammed shut. Well, that is my broken pelvis. Now, he also explained to open the pelvis back up, or open the book back up, they would put me in something called traction, and I had to remain as still as possible for up to 3 months. Now, for anyone that doesn't know what traction is, I didn't before I went into hospital and had it. It's when you have weights which are attached to ropes and pulleys, and they're tied to your ankles, your upper legs, your hips, etc. And that's in an attempt to open the pelvis up and hold it in position so it can obviously fuse, because you can't put a cast on a broken pelvis. Now, another thing, when you break your pelvis or your hip or something like that, you're naturally put in the same ward with those with similar injuries. Now, due to the type of injury, naturally this is going to include a lot of elderly people that have suffered with falls, and that's many of them with dementia, general confusion, and as a result, sleep is near on impossible in those wards. It's really not a great place for you to attempt a recovery. Now, around about 3 weeks into my hospital stay, my friend Simon came to see me, and he could see that I was clearly struggling. Now, by this point, I was close to losing my mind, if truth be told. I started to feel like a character out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So he told me he was going to come back the next day with a gift. Now, that gift was a large container full of cannabis brownies, which was a nice gift. Now, I ate my first brownie on the Saturday evening. Now, I remember that because Match of the Day was on as it kind of kicked in. Now, why is it relevant, I hear you ask? Well, since being checked in to the hospital, I had actually abstained from taking any pain medication other than what the ambulance gave me. And that's due to, number one, known side effects. Trust me when I say you do not want to be constipated with a broken pelvis. And actually, even back then, in like the late 2000s or the noughties, addiction to opioids was no laughing matter. I was very aware of it even back then. So I abstained from taking them. But obviously abstaining from this pain medication was pretty uncomfortable at times. But I suppose the way I was looking at least I could feel if there were any movements I needed to sort of avoid, I really wanted to ensure I had a full recovery. I was only 27 years old and I really wanted to walk again completely unimpeded. I didn't want to be walking around on a crutch or have a limp if I could potentially do anything to stop that from happening. Now, as soon as that brownie kicked in, the pain that I was experiencing noticeably just kind of melted away, and it actually lasted for a good few hours. Now, I continued to self-medicate for the remainder of my hospital stay, even working out kind of the perfect dose for sort of pain management and then the perfect dose to put me to sleep. However, as successful as this approach is and had been while I was confined to that hospital ward, it's not really a genuine option to practice when you're working 12 to 14 hours every day. It's something that you're just not going to be able to do. So I was going to have to find an alternative approach if that sort of level of pain was going to continue. So that is obviously a very great story. Why is that relevant? How did this change my life? Well, the first point is, when I look back, this is actually the actual very day that I got interested in my body and how I could maybe sort of adopt some natural lifestyle tweaks and changes in an attempt to maybe sort of benefit my health and my longevity. Up until this point, like with most people, I hadn't even given my mortality a second thought. I was 27, I was going to live forever. Now, however, being faced with obviously dealing with the after effects of such a grave injury, I obviously had to change that mindset quite seriously. And that's obviously the day that this started to happen. Now, the next point, without going off too much on a tangent, but it would just show a little bit of the change in mindset I had. This was also the day that I was first exposed to the way in which sort of natural health modalities such as cannabis, breathwork, plant medicine, etc., while they were obviously backed by thousands of years of kind of anecdotal evidence, obviously we used them for thousands of years, as well as actually some very, very well hidden science, why they've been ridiculed so much, why we sort of had this snake oil sort of thought about it. Now, I read the official story of the formation of the modern pharmaceutical industry, and this naturally made me see some of the genuine conspiracies in black and white. They were documented, they were verified, in many cases re-verified, and in that sort of very medical research that even today we're still being told doesn't exist. That's another story. But again, tweaking my mindset. However, the actual experience that I'm writing about in this article, the change, was so much bigger. It was a complete and immediate change in the way that I saw and experienced everything. I don't know. Maybe it was kind of my life flashing right before my eyes. Maybe it's that initial conviction that I had that my time had come. You know, when I couldn't breathe, maybe I really did think my time had gone, and it sort of set a switch. Whatever it was, literally immediately after my accident, I started to perceive everything very differently. I began to question a lot of things that I'd previously just accepted or ignored. You know, that I want an easy life, I'll just ignore it and carry on. I became a bit more sort of interested in being vocal about politics. Now, I didn't follow any party, quite the opposite. I began to see through the entire facade. I think it's all theatre, and I believe it's there to kind of divide us, and I really felt and still feel that this needed to change. I was confused by why so many people, myself included, had been so easily hoodwinked into believing that their only option in this life was to work 50 hours plus a week in a job that they invariably hate, and still there would be injustice, financial struggles, poverty, and literally struggle everywhere you looked. Nothing kind of felt right. I just started really sort of questioning and pulling the thread a lot. Now, I began to see evidence of mass manipulation. So, for example, people in my social circles or my work colleagues would all be complaining about, say, benefits cheats or racial divisions. And around that time, I'd always then see like programs on telly about it, or newspaper articles. And these links became really evident with this new outlook on my life. They would often, even these friends and work colleagues would even fall out with each other, sort of to defend their chosen political party. And I just found this really bizarre. Again, something that probably happened beforehand, before my accident. I just didn't notice it. But now it kind of seems so obvious, and it kind of pressed a bit of a button for me. Now, while I was extremely successful in recruitment, I did make very good money. I was very comfortable on that side. If truth be told, I had kind of fallen into it, and I always knew in my early 20s, when I was like really sort of finding my feet, that it was at odds with my energy. And I kind of suppose in the back of my head always thought I'd be doing something else at some point. I found it a little bit of a job-swervy industry. I wasn't a big fan of things like The Apprentice, You're Fired, you know, that sort of thing that goes hand in hand with these sort of sales environments. But I was extremely accustomed to the financial benefits that it had kind of afforded me. So for decades, like most people, I just chose to ignore the obvious imbalance that it was creating in exchange for sort of chasing that ever moving sort of carrot, you know, that gold bar that we all want. So I suppose at that point I was also still measuring success by my bachelor pad, the gadgets, the BMW in the driveway, and actually so much so that even after my accident, when I realised all of this and it all became really obvious to me, it would still be another sort of 8 to 9 years before I was actually brave enough to take the real life-changing action that was required. But this was definitely the day and the time when I had this accident that the seed was planted. Now, even the way that I sort of experienced movies changed. This is the most random one. Before my accident, I would happily lay on the sofa with a Sunday hangover and watch movie after movie after movie. I loved them. I really did. But after my accident, I just kept seeing signs of programming and manipulation. I just couldn't stop seeing it. And I couldn't shake the image in my mind of actors in a film studio acting the part of someone else. Every movie I watched just felt like Tropic Thunder from then on. Now, ironically, it is actually a movie or a film that I used to explain this kind of mind shift that I had. And that's the movie A Bug's Life. I know, Oscar-winning stuff, but bear with me. Now, I was at my mum's house, still recovering from breaking my pelvis. Now, my niece, who was about 1.5 at the time, she came around to spend the day, and we sat down to watch the aforementioned Bug's Life. Now, there's a scene in the movie where the grasshoppers or crickets or locusts, whatever they are, but they're the ones forcing the ants to harvest food for them, and they have a conversation in a bar. And I'll paraphrase it. They basically say, could you imagine if the ants woke up to their strength in numbers and our free ride would soon come to an end. Now, as soon as I heard those words, it was like, click. I just couldn't help but see the direct kind of correlation with the world that we live in, you know, only that the grasshoppers were politicians, bureaucrats and elite billionaires. Now, I immediately thought as well about every time I'd had that conversation with a friend and we had dared venture into the sort of discussing the world of politics, only for us to, we always used to reach this same tired stalemate, and they'd use this get out of jail free card where they would just say, yeah, I agree with you, but what can we do? We're just two people. Now, I'm sure many of you are still sort of sitting there thinking, you're just a mad conspiracy theorist. I'm not. I assure you, I'm a sensible conspiracy theorist. I do entertain some of them. I don't agree with all of them. But yes, you do get turned on to the conspiracies when you have this kind of change in worldview. That's for certain. I'm sure there's also other people listening that are still waiting for me to explain why this day is one of the best days of my life. It was a terrible accident. Whereas kind of before, I suppose I've painted the picture of being a successful recruitment consultant, earning nearly 200k a year, going through the motions. Ignorance was bliss. And now I seem to explain a life or a mind of turmoil. But in short, I hate this phrase, but in short, it was the day that I began my awakening. Now, granted, it did take another 8 years, and I think standout day number 2 from my story in my life to really get the ball rolling. But without this day, none of it would have ever happened. And God knows where I would be right now. No doubt sat in that same sales office, twitching and plagued with acute illness, I would have thought. But anyway, 17 years ago today, I nearly died in a terrible road traffic accident. And the experience this afforded me in my survival, and as I began to really wake up to my mortality and the finite amount of time that we get to experience on this earth, it was absolutely life-changing. And actually today I can see a direct line of correlation to that experience and the fact that I now live in the beautiful hills of the Algarve in Portugal with my amazing wife, our 2 absolutely beautiful daughters. We've taken our life semi-off-grid. We're trying to take it even further off-grid. At times, we've really thrown ourselves into the deep end, but we've grown, we've experienced, and actually we've experienced so much more than we would have in that comfy life back in the UK. 9 years ago, I couldn't even use a roller to paint my house. Now, I'm extremely well-versed in all aspects of DIY and construction, as well as taking on a number of other sort of practical skills. We keep organic fruit here. We've got lots of trees. We're about to plant our allotment. And if the world went completely nuts overnight, I know it's nearly there, I know that I could now look after my family. My children, they speak 2 languages fluently. They've both really come out of their shells since they've been here. And the big bonus is they both get to grow up in the sun in a real old school community village. Every day I get up and I get to practice in a job that I do not see as work, with the added benefit that I'm changing the lives of my clients in the process. Most of all, I really do feel more in tune with my mind, my body, and my real frequency than I ever have. Life's truly awesome. And the accident is definitely the event that lit the initial spark that I needed in order to pivot my life toward a life more in line with my true calling, I suppose. Now, I was lucky. My near-death experience happened early enough in my life, I suppose, to do something about it. But the truth be told, many of us do not realise this until we're on our deathbed. You know, those deathbed regrets. They're all too common in this modern world that we live in. It's really important to realise that change comes in many, many forms. It doesn't always have to be positive, happy occasions that change your life for the better. In fact, more often than not, it's through adversity and struggle that real change does happen. My advice is just keep your eyes and your mind wide open. But above all, if something in your life feels out of balance, if something doesn't feel right, don't wait for your own car accident or your deathbed before you sort of decide to process it and do something about it. Go deep with meditation, journal every day, write down every thought that lingers, good or bad, no judgment. Make a list of everything in your life that does not serve you and take action. Write down everything that truly floats your boat and see how much of it is already a part of your life. And if it's not, just introduce it today. Start a hobby, start a side hustle, learn about subjects you love, see where that takes you. Go on walks, get out in nature, go back to your childhood. Most of all, realize that this life is not a dress rehearsal. There aren't any do-overs. You really do have to make this one count. And if you need any clues on how to achieve this or where to start, do all of the things that get good butterflies going in your tummy. You need to step outside of your comfort zone every day, learn, try, fail, live. If it's jumping out of a plane, do it. If it's traveling the world, do it. If it's setting up a business selling classic comics, do it. If it's starting a blog about something you love, do it. If it's changing your career to something that you genuinely love, do it. Believe me when I tell you, you can make anything work if you have a passion for it and you're happy to work hard. You don't get anything for free. You have to work hard. Unfortunately, that bit can't be circumnavigated. You just really need to spend a bit of time and recalibrate what I suppose success and happiness truly is for you. So what are your thoughts? Have you experienced any standout experiences that would be part of your story? If so, what were they? Feel free to leave a comment, and as always, like, share, subscribe. Till next time, stay groovy.